Hello and welcome to another episode of All Elite Arcade. I am your guest host, Evil Uno, here as always with my good friend, the Chugs. How are you this week, Chugs?
Uno, I'm doing great. I had the chance to play quite a bit of amazing video games this week, so I'm excited to get into it. But how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. A lot of traveling. I don't know if you know, we did Chicago last weekend. We talked about the pay-per-view, big pay-per-view we did, but we're just constantly traveling this week. We had a Wednesday, Thursday taping, and I'm still in America right now. So I haven't done as much gaming as you, but there is one game we both have played, and it is the game I want to talk about, and then we'll get into whatever you're into, but I know, I talked about it last week because I stayed up late. I know you played Astro Bot.
Yes, I did.
I played last time I was in the middle of the second world of potentially 6+ worlds. I'm not quite sure how many there are in total. I've now completed the first 3 worlds, and I can say that, man, it's such a blast to play. No one mechanic ever overstays its welcome. You're constantly barraged. There's a constant barrage of like new Sony entities that you're interacting with. At one point, there's and slight spoilers, but I think if you watch anything Astro Bot, you probably have an idea of it. I had an interaction with like Kratos and a lot of the God of War characters, and like. A small thing I really love from this game is they have their own like type of music that seems very like tech-based, almost MIDI, like the old school like when you would be on a browser platform and there'd be like MIDI songs. It almost feels like that, but current generation. And when you go to these different worlds, one being this God of War one. They literally made their version of what the God of War theme would be, including the booming voices, but with like this like mechanical robotic reverb to it. It's honestly, this is gonna be a very tough year for my game of the year because every few months a game drops and I'm like, oh man, is this the most fun I've ever had playing a video game? I don't know. And I'm feeling that way with Astro Bot. Every level's been incredible. There's even a few levels I can't wait till the end of the year, and we try to discuss like our favorite levels because there's a few of them that I'm like, man, I cannot believe this game has all these different entities inside of it. But that's me. I've been gushing about this game all week. I actually talked to a few people at work. A few people heard the podcast last week. They came, sat down, and they're like, are you playing Astro Bot? This game's incredible. My children love it. I'm in love. I brought my PlayStation this week to travel to play it. It's been universally praised by everyone. But how are you thinking? What's your time been with Astro Bot as of yet, Chugs?
Yeah, so fortunately, I had the chance this past week to finally jump into Astro Bot, and I had heard across the board, whether it was from you or other friends or critics, about how absolutely incredible this game was. And I had a pretty good idea that I was going to enjoy it, considering how much I loved Astro's Playroom. But to put it bluntly, I absolutely feel this is the best 3D platformer I have ever played in my entire life, no question. And there's been some amazing 3D platformers. Aside from how beautiful the game looks, also just the feel. Like, you're instantly in a good mood, you're instantly smiling. Again, the mechanics and like haptic feedback within this game is unlike anything I have ever seen. Every single level I play, they add some new mechanic or some new thing that I have not done previously. The other thing, too, is, again, because, Uno, I know you agree, I really love all video games. I love everything that encompasses the world, the universe of video games, and this really does feel like a love letter to every Sony character that there's ever been. I keep discovering new characters that I thought, oh my God, they put so-and-so in the game, or they put this character in the game, and they keep surprising me. And I've completed the first 2 worlds, but I've 100% completed the first 2 worlds. I can't stop. I want to explore every single inch of this universe, and it's been so unbelievably incredible and such an amazing journey to go on. I think I've said this before too, but I've never gotten a platinum trophy on PlayStation before. I think this is going to be my first platinum. Like, it's just I am having
Absolutely.
so much fun. Yeah, yeah.
I think this
and
is
again,
so good. It's well worth investing that a little bit of extra time, and it's also in a very attainable platinum as
yes.
well.
Exactly, because that's the other thing too. Is I know we talked about this before we got started today, but the cool thing too is I feel like if someone has never played a video game before, they could play this game and have a wonderful time. But if you're also like a diehard hardcore gamer who loves anything and everything video games, you'll get like a nice challenge too. There are certainly some levels, especially if you want to 100% this game, that really kind of test your limits. There's some definitely challenging platforming sections within Astro Bot, but again, my expectation was through the roof for this game, and it somehow has exceeded it. It easily, talking about game of the year, it's certainly in my top 3 as far as the best games that I played this year. And speaking of that top 3, another game that's in that top 3 is Black Myth Wukong,
Yes.
which I have continued playing even more. So again, as I'm diving deeper into this game, it's kind of more the same for me, but in a very good way. Again, the combat is continuing to change. Currently I'm on chapter 3.
Okay.
And the amazing thing about this, and I won't really spoil anything other than the size of this, but chapter 1 was like a perfect amount of exploration and finding optional bosses and secrets. Chapter 2 was even bigger, where I was like, wow, they really crammed a lot of stuff in here. Chapter 3 is huge. I've been on chapter 3 for multiple streams in a row, currently on twitch.tv/the Chugs. I'm going through Black Myth Wukong, and the area is absolutely massive, where I am convinced that so far I've been pretty good about finding all the optional bosses and all the enemies, and I think all the items, but I know I'm gonna miss stuff, and I can't wait to go back when I'm done with this game and see like, oh my god, I missed this secret or this area, because once again, in addition to the combat constantly changing, I fought one of my favorite bosses in the entire game, and I fought him in an area that is completely optional, that is so easy to miss. So there's just so much of that within Black Myth Wukong. Again, I've said this before, but the game does a wonderful job of making you feel like you're really starting to understand everything, and you start one-shotting bosses, and you're like, hey, let's go. And then it throws another challenge at you, where you're like, oh my god, I got to use this or play this way now. So again, I can't recommend Black Myth Wukong enough. It's so good. Udo, have you are you still playing Black Myth Wukong?
Yeah, so after we had that conversation about last week where you had a little bit of a reveal of one of like the most complicated unlocks for like a side boss and side item that I did not entirely complicated, but also just they never make an allusion to it. You know, it just you have to have figured it out yourself, or you have to look it up. I went back and I did the same thing. You told me, and I was like, I need to know, because now like I have to recomb through chapter 2. I feel like I've missed a ton of stuff. So I've recombed through that. I went through this waterfall that we talked about. I have not gone back and combed through all the first chapter again, and I have still not beaten the second boss. But I am advancing forward. I am curious, though, now that you're in chapter 3, it seems to be larger, and you're saying they're throwing curveballs at you. I found chapter 1 was ramping up in challenge, and then the final one, I was like, this is the most challenging guy. And then in chapter 2, I felt like, oh, I'm starting off easy. Oh, there's the highest challenge I've ever met. And then it kept ramping up. Do you feel that now that in chapter 3, the bosses are starting to get even more difficult and starting to have shorter windows and longer attack patterns? Do you feel like it is getting more challenging as you're progressing?
100%.
Yes.
And not only are the bosses getting more challenging, the areas are getting more challenging. Like the lead up to the bosses.
Yes.
Like there's this one area in chapter 3, I won't spoil it, but it's practically like a horror game. Like it is so incredibly difficult, where you have to completely change your mindset on how you're playing or how you're going through this game. But as far as the bosses, yes, like because again, I think there's such a fine line in a game like Black Myth Wukong where you need to be aggressive. You absolutely need to be aggressive if you want a chance at beating some of these bosses. But exactly what you had just said, the windows are getting so much smaller. So not only do you have to be aggressive, but you also have to be patient. It's like this perfect mix of both. Like the boss that I fought recently, who I won't discuss, my favorite boss in the entire game that I've fought, but his windows to be able to attack this guy are so small that the fight itself goes very, very long. Because if you attempt to just, power through it, you're not going to survive for very long. So there's definitely a lot more of that. But again, this is an incredible story. The juicy lore is amazing. The combat is fun. The area is beautiful. I love Black Myth Wukong so much. But anyway, I also got the chance to jump into 2 more games, or put a little bit more time.
Big week for the Chugs. Big week.
Really, really big week. I got to jump into and play a little bit more of, or finally got the chance to play Towerborne, which is a game I've been talking about for a while, which is like what's cool for me is I don't have a ton of experience with roguelike games. But this, first of all, it immediately stands out as like a beautiful, beautiful art style. When the game starts, you can create your own character, make them look like anything that you want. And in addition to that, there are like 4 different classes. There's like a standard shield and sword guy. There's a quicker like dex character that you can play with. But my personal favorite, there's a character with 2 giant fists where you just punch enemies and you could like do smash attacks. It's so cool. And again, you'll play through these levels and there's a hub area, but you'll go out on these adventures to unlock new weapons, new armor pieces, encounter new enemies. Also, again, a very fun co-op game that I think we would really enjoy at some point together. But again, I'm having such a good time with that. I'm still pretty early into the game, so I'm excited to see. But the map itself seems very large and just a very fun side-scrolling beat-em-up roguelike game that has been a joy to play. It's like right up my alley. But the other game that I've been playing, and I got the chance this week to play this with Claudio, is Warhammer's Space Marine 2.
Yes, of course. So Claudio is a huge Warhammer fan, and I think he's more of because Warhammer splits into 2 different types of IPs, right? There's the fantasy Warhammer, now there's the Space Marines Warhammer, and one game is almost exclusively when video games is in first person with hack and slash and sorcery mechanics. This is the one that's third person based, correct?
Yes. It's like a third-person shooter. It actually, in some ways, it almost reminds me where the camera is. I'm not saying it's like this, but it almost reminds me of Gears of War in the sense of like where the camera is with the shooting and things like that.
Behind a shoulder, backwards kind of thing.
Yeah. There's no cover system or anything like that, but it does remind me very much of Gears of War. So I have very little experience with Warhammer games, but it's something I've wanted to jump into for a while. As you had said, Claudio is a huge Warhammer fan, so he was so excited at the idea of me being into this and wanting to try it. And I'll tell you, it has been an absolute blast to play. It is, first of all, I'm playing it on PC. It visually is so impressive. So again, I will give a light spoiler to the tutorial area of this game, just in case. But there was a moment where you're getting towards the end of the tutorial and you're in this like kind of base area and you look out into the land and you see thousands of enemies running towards you. And I'm like, ooh, okay, this is going to turn into a cutscene. Obviously, there's no way. It doesn't turn into a cutscene. You fight thousands of enemies and it looks incredible. You like Days Gone, for example, when all the zombies were chasing.
Yes.
It's like that, but even bigger. It's absolutely wild, and the game never had any hiccups. It ran perfectly fine, and you're just fighting for your life against all these enemies. So cool, and almost too. I know storyline wise, it kind of reminds me of Halo in the sense of the super soldiers and how the whole process goes. But there is so much deep lore within the Warhammer Space Marine universe, which is really, really cool. So again, every level that I've played has gotten crazier and crazier. The combat is super fun. You feel constantly, that's the other thing too that I kind of appreciate, is within this game, so many times it feels like I'm almost gonna die, but then I make it. Like it's, because I'm playing it on normal, it's a challenging game. I really do think it's challenging with all the different enemies, but so many different guns, The story is really unfolding, really cool. And again, that one is super fun to play with somebody else. So again, this is my first Warhammer experience with Space Marine 2. And I'll tell you right now, I'm definitely going to finish it. It's been so much fun. So much fun.
Lore-wise, you know, you're a big lore fan. I always have an issue with myself trying to jump into a game that's a sequel, especially in something like Warhammer, where on top of it being a sequel, there is a whole backstory of content, or at least like the whole mythos that's been written about Warhammer and their IPs. Do you find like this was easily accessible? Like when you jumped in, were you capable of understanding where everything was going at, or does it barrage you with content from the previous game, for example?
So I definitely had a general idea of what the story was and where it was going from the tutorial section on. However, it was so intriguing to me that I did want to know more. So again, a shout out to Claudio, who sent me a ton of lore videos on YouTube explaining Space Marine 1. But to answer your question, no, you 100% can jump into Space Marine 2 if you've never played Space Marine 1 and have a great time and understand where the story is going. Of course, like I said, there are probably details to enemies and backstories to these main characters that people who have played Space Marine 1 would have a better understanding of. But by no means was I ever lost on what was going on. It was a very straightforward story and easy to understand. But again, I wanted to know more, so I watched some lore videos. But it's awesome. It's an adrenaline rush, Uno. Like, you are so fired up playing this game. It's so much fun.
The little bit I was looking clips on my phone while you were talking about this, just because when you said Days Gone, I remember when the trailers would come out, and I think in the trailers they had generated so many enemies that it seemed impossible. Then when you played the game, it's I wouldn't say it's rare, but it doesn't happen often where you are in front of more than, let's say, 40 enemies. So I want to see, like, oh, okay, well, what's he really talking about? This looks insane. It's the amount of enemies that are generated and also seem to seamlessly maneuver around without any hiccup is pretty crazy. And especially with it being co-op, I do want to jump into this for sure.
It is. It's unbelievable. And there's even areas later on where there's that many enemies on the ground, and then you look into the sky and there's thousands of enemies and stuff going on above you. Like I can't comprehend. And again, zero frame rate hiccups. Zero, at least on PC.
Yes.
It's so impressive. So impressive.
And I think this also came out on Xbox simultaneously, and I think PlayStation as well.
Yes.
So don't take our word on those, unfortunately. But I bet you they're pretty good too, because I've heard all the previous Warhammer games didn't really have any issues with their ports. So I'm while we haven't played it, I bet you they are at least serviceable at the very least.
I bet too. Yeah.
That's it for the video games this week, but there's like a ton of other video games where I want to save this for the news piece, but honestly, I kind of want to talk about some of these games coming out in the coming weeks, because I feel like we're going to have to, I'm going to have to set some time aside. I'm going to list a few of them. September, when this episode comes out, it'll be like September 16th, 15th, 16th? Yes. It'll be September 16th when this comes out. This week, September 18th, UFO 50. That's a conglomeration of 50 independent NES-style video games. If you remember, like, the NES used to have... I had Action 52, which was, like, 52 video games on one cartridge, and each game is, like, a bite-sized couple hours to complete. Well, this is what UFO 50 is. It's held by the person that made Spelunky, Mossmouth, and as well as a ton of other developers made their own individual games in it. And on top of that, within the 50 games, there is supposedly a sort of narrative that attaches one to the other, and it's about like a fake history of a console that doesn't exist. That looks super interesting. That's something I'm definitely up my alley, and I think I'll be jumping into. Then late September is where the heavy hitters start coming out. We have Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. We talked about it last week a whole lot. That new video game where you actually play as Zelda and not Link. I know you'll be playing. I know I'll be playing as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's a day one for me for sure.
Absolutely.
I know this one will also be a day one for us. October 8th, Silent Hill 2 Remastered or Remake or whatever they call it is finally coming out. Have you watched any? Because just recently they released more gameplay footage from it. It looks really polished. It looks really nice.
It really does. And what's cool too is I feel like every trailer or gameplay footage that they release, it looks better and better to me, like every single time. So you can tell that they put their heart and soul into this remake. And again, Silent Hill 2, one of the greatest psychological horror video games of all time, if not the very best. So again, it's looking more and more impressive, and I can't believe we're like less than a month away from Silent Hill 2 remake. So yeah, it looks very impressive.
Yeah, it's one of the largest horror IPs ever, and also one of the games that is the most revered, like one of the highest rated video games of all time. So the fact that they're not going cheap on this remake, I'm very happy for, because I cannot wait to jump into it. Metaphor ReFantazio comes out October 11th. That's the new one from Atlas, the people that make Persona. It's a fantasy RPG. I'm very curious about it because I love their art style. I love how they do their UIs. They usually make very meaty games, like 120 hours. I don't know how long this one is going to be, but I heard from the a lot of people have played the first 6 hours as far as media goes, and they've been very impressed with what they've seen, so I'm very excited for that one. We also have Dragon Ball Sparking Zero on October 11th. That is the spiritual successor to the Budokai Tenkaichi series. That's like if you know Dragon Ball and the Dragon Ball games, they've made a ton of them, but one of the ones that people will always tell you were the best ones were the Budokai Tenkaichi series. They made 3 of them. This is like an essential sequel to this with an insane roster of characters. That should be really, really cool. We've got Super Mario Party Jamboree. Also, the pre-releases on this are saying that this might be the very best Mario Party game ever, and includes larger tests of your friendships than ever. So like those, remember like the end of the games when they would award stars and it would always lead to you fighting your friends?
Yep.
Supposedly this game will make it even worse for you and your friendships to survive, so I'm very excited for that as well.
Can't wait.
Call of Duty Black Ops 6, October 24th. It's a big month in October. We're getting a lot of big games. Dragon Age The Veilguard, October 31st on Halloween. I've never played a Dragon Age game. I know we talked about this off screen. They're always suggested to us.
Yep.
I still don't know if I will play one, but this one does look very interesting.
I want to someday. Again, It's been suggested so many times. I feel like we got to try. And it does seem right up our alley.
It does, yes.
It does, yeah.
Slitterhead, that's a third-person, I believe, Asian-made horror game, which looks very interesting. We're getting back into the survival horror game genre more and more. Assassin's Creed Shadows, which we will be talking a lot about next week, because we will likely be having a guest, hint, hint, Will Ospreay, will be here next week to talk a little bit about his love about Assassin's Creed, but also very excited for Assassin's Creed Shadows on November 15th. Yeah. This one is based in Japan and around shinobis. I really love when they go into different areas of the world, because they make really fully realized cities, and I would love to explore that time period in that engine.
Yeah, Uno, and I know we both agree on this, but yeah, the overall atmosphere and the map just looks so awesome. Like, can't wait to explore this. Yeah. And
then finally, the last one that I'm super excited for is in December 9th. It's our latest big game release until we are told that some other game is released at the very least. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is finally coming out. They've showed a ton of stuff. It's very interesting to see an Indiana Jones games. Obviously, it's going to be built around exploration, story pieces, and puzzles. But this one's a first-person, almost fist and whip only, because the developers have gone out and said that while it could have just been a first-person shooter, that would feel cheap and lessen the Indiana Jones experience. So this one is supposed to be way more hand-to-hand combat and using your whip and using your environment to solve things, as well as combat. And I'm very excited to see, because this is made by Bethesda as well, the team that made Arcane Studios, which made why am I blanking on this? I believe they made Prey. which I was really into. And Dishonored. They made the Dishonored series.
I was gonna. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they make incredible
Which
first-person shooter games.
they really do, and the Dishonored franchise is excellent. So knowing that in some capacity with Indiana Jones seems amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, they make lore-heavy first-person games, and I don't think there is a more lore-heavy thing that you can get your hands on than Indiana Jones. So very excited for that. Go in the comments, youtube.com/AEW Games, and let us know what games you're excited for. If we did not list it, put it down below, and we will get your suggestions and put it on our calendar. That's it for the games of the week this week, but that's not all. We will be talking about the news of the week right after this. And we're back. Welcome back to All Elite Arcade, your home for video game discussions here at AEW Games. It's been a big news week. Some good news, some bad news, and I think we should start with the good news, at least if you are a big Sony fan like we are. The PS5 Pro, which has been rumored, it's been essentially a trade secret for a little while. They had game shows just recently that people just openly talked about it coming out. Well, it finally came out with a technical presentation hosted by Mark Cerny. He's the person that revealed the PS5 Pro and is part of a lot of the engineering marvel behind all of these consoles. Well, the Sony's next console is the PS5 Pro. It will come out on November 7th. That's this year. Pre-order starts September 26th, and it is priced at $699 in the US. It's about 40% smaller, or at least I believe it's around that in size from the PS5 model. It's got the same shape, but it's reduced in size, so it'll be a little easier to travel. But we'll get into some of the details because there are some pros, but there's also been some negatives. First off, Mark Cerny makes this presentation. He talks about the history of PlayStation 5. I can't believe it's been, 4 years now already?
Coming up on 4 years.
Yeah, crazy that we've been playing with the PlayStation so long. This PS5 Pro is out, and it features better GPU. So that's a GPU that has 25% more RAM or faster RAM, and 67% more computer cores. What does that mean? So in layman terms, it would be that it is about 45% faster at rendering stuff than the PS5. So that is a pretty large increase. We're talking at almost, it's like, you're talking nearly a half more speed than what the PS5 was. It will feature advanced ray tracing. So ray tracing being the most advanced lighting advancement in the PS4 or in the PS5. Now it's going to be 3 times the capacity of current PS5. So that means it'll be less data to transfer with more realistic lighting, as well as simulating real-world reflections and refractions of light within the environment. So that'd be on water, on glass. For example, if we're bringing it back to Astro Bot, there's so many surfaces like glistening metal, like any reflections on that, a lot of that would be ray tracing nowadays. Well, this time 3 times faster at rendering it, so it will slow down the computing needed from that console.
Right.
They came out with a new device strictly for the PS5 Pro called the PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, or PSSR. It is an AI upscaling. So what that does is the AI improves how games look. They use this, or they are also going to be using this on PSVR 2 games with the PS5 Pro, and that should be a dramatic change because a lot of that still, you could see a lot of the pixels and it'll be quite boxy. I don't know the inner mechanics of it, but essentially what it is that if it is generating all of these individual bytes, well, in between those bytes, it will generate what it perceives is the relation from one to the other. So it'll make everything more smooth and should generally, if you're scaling it to a 4K TV, a lot of time that becomes harder to generate as much images, and so therefore you can kind of see some of like the edges and stuff. That will correct it and make things way more seamless when at large scale TVs. And On top of all of this, those are the big three that they said would be the huge change. It involves a 2 terabyte solid state drive,
Huge.
which is huge. Comparatively, the PS5 storage was at 820 gigs. So this is more than twice the amount. And it's on a solid state drive, so it's going to technically be faster than what it was before. And the every game is going to get a game boost, so the enhancement can prove more than 8,000 backwards compatible PS4 games, which is insane. It'll enhance image quality and resolution for the PS4 games, as well as other stuff as well. So, super exciting. I think that is all good news. They've also talked about a slew of video games that's going to be coming out in the future that will, at the developer size, take advantage of these advancements on the console. That includes video games, and they've publicly said these video games will feature advancements specific for PS5 Pro. Alan Wake 2, Assassin's Creed Shadows, which is coming out in November, which is perfect because that's probably going to be the game that comes out around the time this console launches.
Yep.
Demon Souls, Dragon's Dogma 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Gran Turismo 7, Hogwarts Legacy, Horizon Forbidden West, Marvel Spider-Man 2, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, The Crew Motorfest, The First Descendant, and The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. A lot of that could be using the AI scaling to take advantage of larger sizes, or it could just be, some of these games are probably capped at 30 frames. They might be capped at 60 now. Or it will just take advantage of the new ray tracing features. Some of these games already have ray tracing. Like, for example, I know Alan Wake 2 does, as well as HDR. But with this new thing, they can maybe implement the full spectrum of what they would want, or at least something that is more comparable to what is on PC. All of that is the good news. The bad news, and this is the stuff that people seem to be mad about, one is it is quite expensive. It's $700 USD, and the thing that is hard from this is that it has no disk drive. And so it is digital only. You could purchase the disk drive for $80 extra. A lot of people are pretty mad about that because of the cost of it. But we can have that discussion later on. That is each their own for sure. And that is the US price. The UK price, it would seem, is €6.99. And in Japan, it's a little higher. Roughly, in Europe, it is $900 US to own one of these consoles, and in Japan, it's about $850 US for one of these consoles. So there's a lot of international markets that are mad about the current pricing. That has happened before with Sony products, and while there will be an uproar, it is very unlikely they budge on the price. They do a lot of market research, and I assume they think a lot of people are going to buy it at this price regardless. So all of that comes to this. Will you get a PS5 Pro, Chugs?
I'm going to be honest. I'm still kind of on the fence. And there is, what truth be told, and this has kind of changed as time has gone on, is generally speaking, when I first really started getting into games and buying my consoles, I was never really a mid-generation console buyer. I had my Xbox One, and that was all I got. I never got the Xbox One X. Now, I bought a PS4 Pro. In the beginning, I didn't have an original PS4, and I loved it. It was certainly the most powerful console within the 8th generation that I had. However, recently, I have started buying mid-gen consoles, whether it be the Nintendo Switch OLED instead of the original Nintendo Switch, or the Steam Deck OLED instead of the original Steam Deck. And it's a noticeable difference, a noticeable difference. So now I'm thinking maybe I will end up getting a PS5 Pro, especially after, I would love to be able to get my hands on this thing because, again, it seems like this is going to be a pretty big jump forward for PS5. For example, we were talking about this before, but the difference between quality mode and performance mode. I know it's been mentioned before that about 75% of players prefer performance mode. So now getting the chance to be able to play with ray tracing on and fidelity and the highest quality image also at 60 FPS seems like it would be pretty awesome. Because right now the only thing I can do that on is my PC currently, and getting to see those games at super high resolution with super high frame rates is really, really awesome. So, Uno, I think actually now, as time has gone on, I think there is a chance that I'm going to end up picking up the PS5 Pro. I definitely want to see what it looks like, to see if there is that big jump like there was for the Switch OLED and the Steam Deck OLED, at least to me. And on paper, it sounds like it will be. Also, I'm really, really happy about the 2 terabyte SSD.
Yes.
Because that's the one thing I love about my PS5 now, is the fact that you can internally install an SSD, because currently my PS5 has a 4 terabyte hard drive in it. And I love the idea of feeling like I'm never going to run out of space, because I don't ever want to like delete games, even though it stays in the cloud. I want to keep all the games on my console. So the fact that this starts with a 2 terabyte SSD, and then knowing I could put another 4 terabyte SSD into it, I believe, to then have 6 terabytes would be absolutely incredible. So it's interesting. Like I said, normally not a mid-gen console buyer, but seeing the preview video and waiting to hear what people think about it, I do like the idea of playing my games on the most powerful hardware. So it's definitely possible. What about you, Uno? Do you think you're going to get it?
So I'm kind of in a weird state where I have purchased a lot of the mid-tier ones. The only one I have not recently is the OLED Switch, and I will likely get there soon. I'm just, I think, waiting. Probably when Zelda comes around, that seems like a great time to probably jump in. I feel like we're going to get the last few Nintendo large titles in the next year before Switch 2 comes out. But for PlayStation, I was already thinking of getting a Pro when the original one came out, but for none of the reasons that have been disclosed. So a lot of the reasons I wanted it was not because it would be faster, not because it would have better ray tracing, or that I could go to essentially default performance mode and the visual aesthetics mode on top of it.
Amazing.
The reason I want it was I don't like the shell casing on a PS5 Pro. I think it is very cumbersome to travel with, and for the lives that we lead, I thought like, okay, well, when the PS4 Pro comes around, it'll be smaller and it'll probably be more manageable. While it is smaller, it has the same shell casing. It is not a box format, so it is still very cumbersome to travel with. Mine has been ravaged from travel because it is just not an easy box to place into anything. And so I'm kind of up in the air on, I want it because I want every console that comes out. I'll be honest.
I know.
I'm very selfish in that sense, where I just need to have the latest product. But I think I need to get my hands on it, because while it is nice to say that computing speed is faster and ray tracing will be better, no video will show that to me in a way that I think I'll understand until I get my hands on it, compared to a PlayStation, and be like, oh, okay, I feel it's like the OLED, you know, Switch OLED. When they announced it to me, I was like, oh, whatever. But then when I finally saw it in action, when Serpentico showed it to me, for example, I was like, oh, I see a clear difference now. And I think that's going to be a similar thing in this situation. I think I need to get my hands on it before I confirm a pre-order for sure.
Yeah, because Uno, going off that again, that was kind of why I was naive to think when you would get mid-generation consoles, with the exception of course, like you said, I want to have every console for the collection or whatever, because we love video games so much. But again, I didn't understand how much of a jump it really was. So I'm assuming that from a PS5 to a PS5 Pro, it will be something that you can really notice, because again, that was the case for the Switch OLED, something for the Steam Deck OLED, and if it's the same with the PS5, hoping to get my hands on it beforehand, PS5 Pro, I think, will definitely end up in the game room.
Well, let us know on youtube.com/awgames if you will be getting the PS5 Pro, $700 USD, and also let us know, like, is this enough of a jump up for you to pay $700 when, for example, the 2 terabyte Xbox Series X is only $600, while it doesn't feature a lot of the upscaling and a lot of the upgrades. It is a comparable device for $100 cheaper. Does that bother you, or are you all in on Sony? Let us know, youtube.com/awgames in the comments, and we will check that out going into next week's episode. That was actually the good news of the week, because it's actually been a series of weirdly It's been some weird news this week for sure.
It has, man.
First of all, I'm going to start off with this one. We talked about this before, and I feel like we talk about specifically this situation every 3 weeks. But
I know.
Microsoft has just laid off another 650 staff members. But somehow with that, no games are canceled and no studio is closed, which is very crazy. I think a lot of it is around they came out with a Call of Duty Warzone mobile game, and a lot of the layoffs are related to the mobile division that was working on that, which I guess didn't hit as large as they hoped. You know, Call of Duty, one of the hottest sellers every single year. I think it was assumed that it being a mobile port of the game, or at least making a mobile Call of Duty game, would do bonkers. And I guess it didn't meet up to Microsoft's expectations. And so these 650 staff members have been let go. And Phil Spencer has, in an internal memo obtained from the public, said that it was the changes were to organize our business for long-term success. And so while it is not canceling any projects or any full studio, it is shaving off what they believe would be excess in people. This comes after, and we've talked about this earlier in the year, this is after they've already laid off 1,900 people earlier in January, making it that Xbox has let go of over 2,500 people this year alone. It's to me, that's worrying. I think Xbox does not have a strong IP right now to play off of. They're likely at the end of their cycle on the Xbox, unless they have a mid-tier kind of like a PS4 Pro that's going to change everything and a ton of IPs coming up. It seems like a bad year for Microsoft. I mean, there is no good optics out of letting go 2,500 people.
No, of course not. That's never good news to hear. And again, when you hear more and more people getting let go, obviously it's not good. It's definitely not good news. But then also, I'm interested too. This is kind of a random observation, but I'm interested if Xbox goes the Xbox Series X Pro route, or if they go this wild handheld route, which again, that has been rumored for a while too. Which I think for Xbox would be incredibly beneficial. I think if they did create something along the lines of a Steam Deck, but with Windows on it, with full accessibility, I think that could be something huge for the Xbox IP. But again, to go to the actual topic, very, very disappointing and very sad that 650 more people released staff-wise from Microsoft.
Yeah, and it's just a further development in like the volatile market of video games right now. There's a lot of layoffs this year. A lot of it being from video games did so well 5 years ago that a lot of people got hired and put on projects in hopes that it would make as much money coming in now. And now I guess just the excess of staff has just caught up to Xbox. While it was a little side comment, I do believe you're right. To me, what would be more interesting for Microsoft is not a Xbox, whatever the next number would be, or whatever the next name would be. What the handheld to me is what would be the most interesting, because especially their largest investment has been on the Game Pass. If I can get Game Pass on the go on a console made to play those games, I feel like that's something that can rival the Steam Deck. And also, while the PC and Steam Deck are not their rival directly, Sony and Nintendo are. And Nintendo has a handheld, but it is not of the same caliber that likely an Xbox or Sony would be able to make hardware-wise. And Sony has not invested in a handheld. They had their weird little handheld release.
Portal?
The Portal, I think, which was released late last year, which, from my understanding, is good, but does not operate the same way as you would think. It needs Wi-Fi access to connect to a PS5 elsewhere. And while that is better than they anticipated, it is not the same as having a hardware piece that you can install games onto and play like a whole library of Game Pass games. So it really sucks that people are being let go, and it also is just a bad sign for Xbox, Microsoft, in the future. And I hope that I hope they could turn this around at some point because the market is just better with more consoles out there.
Yes.
I think if they drop down, it then becomes Sony and Nintendo. And while they are very different, I feel like that's actually not going to be good for the market. And as well, especially if you're a worker in that market. You know, if you are someone who is employed as a developer, who is employed as a PR or management or so on and so forth in the video game industry, the more consoles, the better, because larger landscape for video games, larger options for jobs, and hopefully we could see a light in the future where Microsoft does better, and also these people who have been let go can find jobs within the industry as well.
Find work. Well, 100%.
All right. Well, if we thought that was the only bad news, here's a weird one. I'm not sure. This is at least not a firing, but a very, very odd situation. Annapurna, the people that you may know, they've released Outer Wilds, Sayonara Wild Hearts, Cocoon, one of my favorite games from a few years ago, Lorelei and the Laser-Eyed, Stray, Neon White, What Remains of Edith Finch, and a ton of other games. They make what is considered AAA games, you know, like super indie games that are incredible, usually very heavy on lore, or at least on they're very original mediums for storytelling.
Very critically acclaimed.
Yes, I think most of their video games have very, very positive ratings. Well, Annapurna Interactive is not only a video game division, it is also a movie division. And so, just recently, all of Annapurna's video game team resigned. That is 25 members of Annapurna Interactive that were specifically on the video game wing have resigned, and that comes from a dispute with billionaire Megan Ellison, who is the owner of the video game publisher's parent company, which is Annapurna Pictures. Annapurna has grown on to have a footing in the TV show and movie industry. It's made movies such as American Hustle, Her, which was like that Joaquin Phoenix cyborg movie, Zero Dark 30, which was acclaimed and nominated for awards. So they make larger movies now. Well, in this dispute, the president of Annapurna Interactive, the gaming division, and his team was sought to spin off their division from the parent company and become an independent entity. But while those discussions were happening, Megan Ellison, who owns everything, stepped away from those negotiations, and in protest, Gary, who is the head president of Annapurna Interactive, resigned, and all the other executives at the label resigned as well, making it a total of 25 people resigning over this dispute. Pretty crazy, because it's very rare that a full developer or full development studio just steps away. So right now we don't know what's going to happen. It's a weird situation where Annapurna has gone out and said that yes, their video games will still be coming out. So that includes video games that were in development such as Blade Runner 2033, Ghost Bike, and Wander Stop. They will continue making their movies, but while the spokesperson says that, we have no idea who's going to be working on this.
Right.
It's a very, very weird situation. And then I am sure the people that have left Annapurna will also make their own independent studio. I would assume that is kind of the move here, because they were supposed to be their independent entity. When that hasn't happened, I assume this is a layup to eventually have their own thing. A very, very weird situation.
Yeah, very strange. Again, no idea exactly what the dispute was, but truth be told, this team of 25 has made some incredible games. So going off of what you said, Uno, I hope they form their own studio and are able to continue making these great games that so many people have really enjoyed. But yeah, wild situation. Yeah,
and that's and just so we know, I believe it's not just developers. It's like it's the publishing wing. So a lot of times, let's say a developer of an independent game is going to make most of the core of the video game. The publishers, because if you're a single developer making a video game, it is very hard to get your game in a ton of markets and get eyes on it. The Annapurna name puts a lot of weight on that. And so who knows where that goes now? I don't know what's going to happen to the future games. Who is going to be working on that and also publishing these things? Very, very weird situation. But I'm sure we'll hear more about it because it is quite an odd thing to happen for sure.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, that is it for the news of the week for this week. Not all great stuff, but hey, we're getting a PS5 Pro, which a positive to some for sure. But we will be back with our favorite segment very soon. That's right, the community mailbag will be happening right after this. And we're back. Welcome back to our favorite segment of All Elite Arcade. It's the community mailbag. That is where you ask us some questions and we answer them. You can get your questions read here on All Elite Arcade. Go to tbs.com/arcade mailbag. That is tbs.com/arcade mailbag, and get the Chugs and Evil Uno to answer your questions. We really do appreciate them. Some of the best times here on the podcast is reflecting on some of your questions. And we've got 4 questions today, starting with Dwayne.
Yes, Dwayne, thank you very much for the first question. Here we go. Dwayne says, "Hey, Chugs and Uno. On a previous episode, you guys spoke about how crucial it is for a game to have solid music and sound design in order for it to be a success. I wanted to take that idea in a bit of a different direction. How important is it for a game to have great box/cover artwork? Have you ever been influenced to purchase or not purchase a game based on the artwork alone?" Uno, what do you think?
So it's weird because I had an idea in mind for this, but then as I was continuing to think about it, it is very important what the box art is. And nowadays, it is not a physical box art. While that is super important, a lot of times what makes me want to play your game is your little thumbnail of your video game, be it on Steam, be it on the PlayStation Store, be it on Xbox. A lot of time, the art pieces that are featured there get me to delve deeper and then start looking at the gameplay, start looking at the screenshots. And there was a time where, when I was much younger, all that was important to me was box art.
Yes.
Back in the NES days when I would buy NES games, Super NES games, and even all the way to N64, or when you would go to Blockbuster, because when we were kids, there were rental stores. The cover art was all I cared about. If the cover was cool and I turned it around and your 3 screenshots looked interesting, that's all I cared about. I never even looked at reviews when I was younger, and until maybe the last 10 years, that's all I really cared about, was just like, what's your art style? Does it look like a game I like based on your 3 thumbnails? And I've purchased a lot of video games, especially on the NES and Super NES, based strictly on what the cover art was. Nowadays, less important, but I still think a good thumbnail is very, very important, because that is what, and much like, let's say, YouTube content, Twitch content, or any video content, that bite size of your game is the introductory point of your video game, and I think it is still quite important.
Oh, yeah. So for sure, when you look at the history of games, box art is incredibly important. Like, if you go as far back as to like the Atari 2600, the artists who would make these box arts for these games were like, some of the drawings and the designs were incredible, and they stuck out like a sore thumb. So right away you're like, ooh, I have to play this game. But Uno, going off of what you said, it definitely mattered more to me as a kid. Like, one that really sticks out is Streets of Rage 2. Mm-hmm. Like, I saw the cover of that and was like, oh, look at all these characters fighting. This looks so cool. This looks so awesome. I can't wait to play this. And then, interestingly enough, as time has gone on, again, I do stand by having a cool box art is very, very cool. Or like you said, a cool picture on Steam or the PlayStation Store or Xbox Store. But I actually have gotten to a point now where I fall in love with the box art if I fall in love with the game. Like, weirdly, for example, the Metal Gear Solid on PlayStation 1 box art is just a white background with Metal Gear Solid on it. It's very, very simplistic. But I love that box art, as simple as it is, because it, again, when I think of playing this game, I think of that box art. Or like Resident Evil 2 being really scary with William Birkin and his claw in the front and his face over there. I was like, ooh, this looks really scary, but I'm thinking more about the game as well. Final Fantasy VII is another iconic box art. So box art is really cool because it's exciting to see what artists and what direction they want to go to say, like, hey, this is what our game is all about. And I love seeing all the different designs. But yeah, definitely was more attention grabby for me as a kid. Whereas now I do appreciate all the different box arts, but I more, again, pretty much if I love your game, I also love your box art.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. Great question, honestly.
Yes.
I would love to someday explore what some of our favorite box arts are ever, because man, there's some straight up art pieces that have come strictly from video game box art pieces that I would frame and put on my wall. No doubt.
I actually do want to say one of my favorite things to collect are Super Famicom games, because the box art for those was completely different than the Super Nintendo. And some of these pictures or box art things are so cool to check out. So I would love to discuss that someday. That's a great idea.
This next question comes from Shady P. Hey fellas, love the pod. It looks like we're going in a direction where next-gen consoles are launching without disk drives. I know the internet is mad at this, especially with the news of the PS5 Pro coming out with a disk drive sold separately. However, I'm on the other side of the spectrum. If it means the digital version console is cheaper, then I'm entirely for it. I think the last time I bought a physical disc game was back in 2019, and it was Gears of War 5 for Xbox. Also, even when you insert a disc into your console, you still have to wait for the game to download the install files from the internet. What are your thoughts on disc versus discless consoles, and when was the last time you bought a physical disc game? Thank you, Shady P.
Yes, great question. So I am of the opinion that I love the world that we live in now, in the sense of, for the most part, you can do either. Like, if you would like to buy a physical copy of a game, I think it's great that that's available. I don't want that to disappear. I think physical media is incredibly important for things like the box art, which we just mentioned about. But as a collector, it's very cool to have these and know that your game is in your possession with physical media. However, the convenience of discless is absolutely amazing. I, for the most part now, do that. I'll just digitally buy a game so many times. It's so convenient, so easy. So really, I do have a fair amount of physical video games that I do have in my collection, and I'd love to have those on display and see the games I've collected over the years. But again, lately, I've just been buying everything digitally. So, but from a collector standpoint, and to preserve it, I think having physical media is very important. But again, for the most part now, I do buy everything digitally. The last thing that I bought physically that I can think of was FF7 Remake. I got like the collector's edition of that game because that game was super important to me, and I love that I have it. But also, I haven't opened it, and I have the digital game downloaded on my system. So yeah, I'm of the impression that I like the option to have both. I really do.
I want both for sure. I think much like you, I think a physical piece of media is very fun to own on a collection. You know, like if I really enjoy a game, I go out of my way and I will go get the collector's edition steelbox, or you know, if it has like a statuette or it has extra pieces, it's my way to support. But also, it's like a badge of something I really enjoy. Remedy games, I've bought a lot of the collector's editions. And I've gone back to play and get those. And the last game I bought physically was God of War 2, and that has nothing to do. I would have probably bought it digital, but I was so eager to have it, and I wasn't home that I was like, I'm going to a store because I need to feel like I have it right now, so I can go home and play it. But I'm actually more geared towards owning digital for the same reason that was listed here by Shady P. I think you buy a disc, you end up having to download 80 gigs of content anyways. I like the access of my mobile phone being able to connect to my console and just preemptively download a game. Sometimes, you know, a game comes out on a Tuesday, but on the Friday before, you can have it all prepackaged and ready to go. So the second it hits midnight, you can play it. I like all those advantages. And then on top of that, we're in a world where handheld games rules the world, and that's actually how I play most of my video games. There was a time I owned a PSP, and it was cool to have physical media, but now with the amount of different games I could be playing, it would actually kind of irritate me to bring 8 different little cartridges just to jump into 20-minute chunks of different video games. So I am definitely geared towards digital. And then while we didn't mention it during PS4 Pro, I'm not bothered by the fact that it's discless. To me, the only concern from that is that I can't play Blu-ray DVDs, and not that I own a lot of those either, but occasionally I will like to go back and watch some TV series. That's the only main concern, because when it comes to video games now, my first go-to is to go buy a digital.
Sure. Shady, thank you very, very much for the question. Next up from Maynard, thank you very much for the question. Hey, Uno and Chugs, love the positivity on the pod. Well, thank you. Getting all the gaming news from you two is something I look forward to every week. My question takes a trip down memory lane, back to before the time of online gaming. What is your favorite sleepover gaming memory? Oh, I love that question.
I love that. I used to do sleepover video gaming all the time. There are like 4 main ones that pop into my head. When I was a kid, the first time I ever saw a Sega Genesis game was the Sonic 3 game, and that was at a friend's home. And I was like, I cannot believe this is what Sega is. I had only seen the commercials. I never saw it in hand. And so to be like at another person's home and seeing like something you don't own, it felt like, I was like, wow, there's a whole world out there that I can't like get or wrap my finger around. One of my favorite things though is I used to, when I was younger, hang out with a friend around Halloween time, and we would watch like 4-hour blocks of horror television. You know, they would play Freaky Stories or the Goosebumps or whatever the movies that would play, and we would hang out around Halloween time to do that. But during one of those stays, one of the TV shows happened to be something we had already seen. It was like a repeat from a previous year, and so my friend was like, "Oh, do you want to play Resident Evil 2?" And at that time, I didn't own it. 2, was only sort of aware of Resident Evil because it seemed like a game I wasn't going to get into. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll watch you. And I watched him play for about an hour and a half, and I was like, holy crap, this is terrifying. Especially like being I feel like video horror games, when you're in control, is terrifying, and when you're in the room with someone who is playing it, it is equally as terrifying, because you're like having that experience with them, and you're out of control, but also being an observer to the experience. And so that was always something that I thoroughly enjoyed. And then much later in my life, while not sleepover in the sense of children going out for sleepovers, and more, I slept on people's couches for a lot of years just because, going to school, traveling for wrestling. But anytime I would go to someone's home and they had Rock Band, that sleepover was Rock Band from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. And I remember my friend Frank, we would do this all the time. We would literally get dressed up. We would play our instruments, but we'd be like wearing furry vests. We'd be wearing freaking crazy hats, and we'd really rock out to it. So I miss those days for sure. I don't feel like we're older now. It feels odd to go out and have our sleepovers, but very fond memories of those days.
That's amazing. I also have 2 stories, and they both involve my brother and my cousin. Because, again, we grew up together playing video games, and lots of times me and my brother would stay over at my cousin's house, because in that house we were allowed to stay up as late as we wanted. At my house there was a bedtime. At his house we could stay up as late as we wanted. And there's 2 stories. One is when one night we decided, both of these stories involve staying up all night, but one story was me, my brother, and my cousin staying up all night until the sun came up, grinding on the open world of Final Fantasy VII. So one person would stay up for like an hour and just do battle after battle, because we wanted to see how powerful we could get. And then he would kind of lay down, rest his eyes, and then I would play for an hour. And then I would lay down, and my brother would play for an hour. And we tried to get as strong as possible. We got so overpowered, but that was so much fun because we loved FF7 so much. That world map theme is just burned into my memory. But the other one was before online gaming really started taking off. Halo Combat Evolved had a thing called Xbox Connect, And me, my brother, and my cousin stayed up all night once again until the sun came up, playing online Halo Combat Evolved before it was ready. It was at like 5 frames per second. It was the FPS and the ping was just out of this world. But we had so much fun glitching all around the map, and knowing that we were playing other people from somewhere else was just such a cool, surreal experience. So those are two that really stick out to me as some of my favorite sleepover memories. What a great question. Thank you very much for that question.
Yeah, thank you, Maynard, for the question. And this last question is from Steven. Hi, Chugs and Uno. I love watching your podcast on YouTube every Monday. Thank you very much for doing so.
Thank you.
My question for both of you is this. When you were first introduced to video games, what would you say would be your childhood video game anthem? Mine is the first level theme song of Streets of Rage 1. Great question, Steven. Great question.
Great question. It's interesting that you bring up Streets of Rage because Go Straight, the first level in Streets of Rage 2, is a song that is absolutely burned into my memory. But I will pick a different one since you chose Streets of Rage. The one that me and my brother, and again, when I was a kid, I played this all the time. My first video game mascot before I even knew about Mario was Sonic the Hedgehog. And on our Sega Genesis, we had Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and so many times we played the second stage Chemical Plant Zone, which that song is so good, by the way, but that is burned into my memory. And it was very challenging for us to play as kids. We could always get through the first stage, no problem. But when we got to that Chemical Plant Zone where you could potentially drown and the horror music would play, we would get so nervous or crushed by those blocks that moved when you were under the water. But Chemical Plant Zone, to this day, I have that song downloaded on my phone. I love it so much. So, yeah, that song is burned into my memory based on how many times we would play that level over and over and over again. So Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
For me, it's funny. My first console ever was the NES, and so my first experience playing a video game was at Christmas playing Duck Hunt and Mario. And while the Mario theme song, yes, is probably the one that you would anticipate, the one that I remember in my childhood was I would have the Nintendo, and I was a kid. I couldn't purchase games, but my grandparents would go to Florida every single winter. And when they did, they would buy a barrage of NES games for cheaper in America than they would be in Canada. And when they would come back every month, if I was a good kid, they would give me a video game. They already knew preemptively they owned 12 of them, and they were going to give them throughout the year. And so my first two they gave to me was Clue Clue Land and Bubble Bobble. They're both puzzle-based NES game. And the Bubble Bobble theme is something that's ingrained in my mind because of my childhood. So much so that when I started professional wrestling and I was a video game-based character player, Uno, my first theme song was the Bubble Bobble theme song because I didn't realize that I thought everyone knew what Bubble Bobble was. And while a lot of like hardcore video gamers did, it just wasn't like it wasn't one of the main titles at all. But to me, it was super, super important. And to me, it symbolized what video games were. And so when I think of my childhood, I definitely think of the Bubble Bobble theme.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Steven, for that question. Great question. Thank you for letting us go back down memory lane and delve deep into some nostalgia. If you want your question answered, go to tbs.com/arcade mailbag and send us your questions. We answer 4 questions at the end of every podcast. You can get your question on a future episode of All Elite Arcade. Also, if you're on youtube.com/awgames, hit those comments down below. Let us know what your childhood song was. As well, let us know what your favorite sleepover memory was, if it relates to video gaming, because we would love to read about it for sure. Chugs, what are you doing on Twitch this week?
Well, this week, I'm going to get back at it, Uno, twitch.tv/thechugs. I am still going through Black Myth Wukong, so it's going to be a lot more of that, and I can't wait. I'm thinking about this game when I'm not playing. So very, very excited for that. So if you want to check out my playthrough of Black Myth Wukong, great community, please feel free to stop over at twitch.tv/thechugs.
And you can find me at twitch.tv/eviluno. We just recently did our mystery wrestling event, but I will be getting back on Twitch because I've been waiting for UFO 50 for about 6 years. Yes. There's 50 games for me to delve into, which will make a ton of different content. Plus, it's I like exploring it. Why not explore it with me? Go to twitch.tv/eviluno. Find us there. Plus, you can find this podcast, youtube.com/AWGames, if you want to see our lovely faces. Every Monday, noon Eastern Standard Time, the video format drops alongside our podcast, which you can listen to on all of your podcasting platforms, such as Apple and so on. Do see you next Monday, noon Eastern Standard Time, for another episode of All in Arcade. We will see you around. Have a good one, and bye-bye.